first, let's make a very simple plain cotton material. So look at this reference image. You can see that the texture has this fabric pattern, natural fabric pattern. So what we're going to do, we're going to try and find some nice fabric photographs that we can use to create a texture. So go to Google image search and try to find, let's say, cotton fabric. So here are the images. This is pretty decent, I guess. Well, not gonna work. The photo is very skewed. Okay, let's look for large photos first. Let's look at this one. Too blurry. How about this? Okay, this looks pretty decent. It has a pattern to it. Let's try to create a texture. So copy the image, go to the Photoshop and create a new image file. Okay, let's paste it. And let's use the crop tool to enlarge our canvas like this. Let's try for a square texture. Okay. Copy everything, paste, and move down here. Let's try to blend it together so there is no visible seam. The pattern is pretty busy, so the seams won't be too noticeable. So for fabrics, it's better to use a brush with high hardness. So I'm going to erase the border of this overlaying layer with a very hard brush. Okay, I think this looks pretty good. I'm going to show you what happens if you use a soft brush. You have this pretty visible blurry edge happening. So it's better to use a hard brush for this sort of very sharp pattern. Okay. Merge down. Let's offset it to see the seams. The seams are not too visible, but let's try to fix them. Okay. Paste again. And just delete to blend them together like this. The pattern is very busy, so it will not be too noticeable if you make some slight mistakes or the seams are visible. Let's use the clone stamp tool with a 100% hardness now, just to break up the seam a bit. It's not going to be perfect, but still, I think it's going to be pretty usable. Okay. So, merge it down, and let's give it some color now. Create a new layer, select the paint bucket tool, and choose a nice color. Let's try something like this. Okay, now I'll try different blending modes to see something you like. Okay, let's try this one. So let's save our texture. Save as PNG to save the maximum amount of detail. And let's try fabric 1. Okay. So while we're at it, let's save this black and white version as well. I'll use it as our bump map. Let's increase the contrast a bit. And save. Okay, let's test it out in our scene. So here's a pretty simple scene rendered with the V-Ray default material. It's just some cloth thrown on some objects and tangled around, just to demonstrate the cloth from different angles. Okay, so let's create a new V-Ray material now. And assign our diffuse map. So let's use the colored texture we created. And here it is. Let's say it in viewport. Okay, so let's increase the tiling a bit. The pattern should be pretty small. Perhaps something like this. Okay, let's see how it looks with just the diffuse texture. First, let's change the filtering type to summed area for sharper details. And let's render. So far it looks pretty flat. Let's try to add our bump map. So remember the tiling, it's 6 by 6, and we'll use the same for our bump. Let's try a higher value like 100. Okay, looking better. So what I've found is that to give added realism to fabric materials, you have to use fall of map in the diffuse slot. The way we use it is by creating a lighter version of our diffuse texture and using it on these edges here I'm showing. So basically the parts that are facing you use the default texture, and the parts that are facing like this, perpendicularly, are using the lighter version. So this creates an illusion of a fuzzy edge, like fabric often has. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. Okay, go to your diffuse slot, click on the bitmap, and change it to fall off. Make sure you keep the old map as submap. And let's copy it to the second fall off slot. Okay. So once it's in the second slot, let's mix it with the white color. So this will make it lighter, as well as keep the pattern of fabric. Okay, so now you can see the front parts are using the default texture, and the parts that are facing away from you are using the lighter version. So let's try the towards away fall off type and adjust the curves to have this effect only on the very edge of the material. Okay, maybe let's make it even whiter. Okay, I'm going to use pure white for now just to see the effect in action. Okay, like this. And let's try at 50. So here's our previous render. Let's save it and re-render with the fall off in diffuse slot. Notice this edge over here. You can clearly see a small white highlight on the very edge. So this is the work of fall off map in our diffuse slot. The effect is pretty slight, but you can still notice it. So let's save it and compare. So with fall off and without. With and without. The effect is pretty slight, but it gives the fabric a softer appearance. You can make it even stronger if you choose the perpendicular parallel fall off type, create an even lighter mix. So let's try 20. Okay, so this is a much stronger effect. The fabric appears to be much softer, fluffier, and what have you. So another thing you can do to increase the realism of your fabric materials is create a custom bump map that simulates folds and wrinkles in the fabric. Okay, so this is with fall off, this is without fall off at all. Notice how much softer this appears. Okay, let's try and create our crease and fold map in Photoshop. So go to Photoshop, create a new file. I'm going to use 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels. So I'm going to use my Wacom tablet. So create a new layer and fill it with neutral gray. That's 128, 128, and 128. Fill, create another layer, select your brush tool. Let's use a low hardness value and large diameter, and a white color. So I'm going to try and draw some wrinkles and large folds. So I will start by creating the larger folds. Just draw them randomly like a pattern in fabric. Okay, like this. Let's blur the whole layer like this. Okay, good. Let's decrease the opacity a bit, like this. Okay, create a new layer, select the black color and create some more dips in the surface. Blur. Okay. Merge everything together and let's offset the image to see the seams. 750 by 750. Okay. Let's use the clone stamp tool with low hardness and fill these seams right in. I'm just trying to get rid of the hard edges of seams. Okay, so that's a nice base. Now let's start to create some more detailed wrinkles. Select the white color, decrease the diameter of your brush. And let's reduce the opacity. I'm just drawing these wrinkles in layers like this. Use multiple strokes to overlay the effect and create a stronger white. Don't worry if they're not perfect, we're still gonna blur. Okay, let's blur it. Good. Use the... So first merge it down and use the offset filter again. Just painting over the seams here. Picking a color and painting over. Okay. Okay, let's try to draw some black folds for the deeper part. You can try different diameters for your brush. blur again. Okay. Merge down and offset again. Okay. Let's draw some smaller lines on this layer. And blur. Okay. Okay, let's try and see how it looks. Let's go back to our fabric material and let's try to mix our bump with the image we just created. So I change this texture type to mix, keep old map as submap, and select the false texture. Okay, let's see it in viewport and increase the tiling. Perhaps stretch it out a bit like this. Okay. Let's mix it at 50 for now. And try a higher bump value just to see the effect better. Render. Notice these folds over here. They usually make the fabric appear much more interesting than if it were simply flat. So this sort of bump map is very useful for things like chairs, sofas, and other upholstered furniture. Makes it seem much more interesting than if everything was simply flat. So the effect here is probably a bit too strong. We can go back to 100 as our bump value. Okay, too weak now. Let's leave it at 150. So that's how you create a soft fabric material. So let's rename it to soft fabric. Okay, let's make a copy. And now I'm going to show you how to create a velvet material. It uses the same principle we just used on this material, but even more exaggerated and stronger. So look at this photograph. The front parts of fabric are very, very dark, while those that are facing away from you are intensely colored and much brighter. So that's the basic idea of velvet material. Notice here as well the light edge and the strong color that is facing you. So let's create a velvet material. Let's rename, assign to our object, and let's disable the bump for now. Okay, go to the diffuse slot, get rid of the textures from these slots, and let's reset the curve like it was before. Okay, like this. So this is how it looks with the default settings. Okay, render. So what we want to do is make these edges much brighter than the basic color. So first set up our basic color. Let's try some deep purple, like this, and let's make the edges lighter, less saturated color. Okay, so now go to the mix curve and adjust it so the effect is only seen on these edges. Perhaps something like this. Okay, this already looks pretty velvety to me. Maybe the effect is too strong. You can add some more points to control the curve better. For example, I'm going to add the point here. So now there is a larger difference between the fall of lighter color and darker. Let's make it even darker, like this. Okay, so this is a pretty basic diffuse map for a velvet material. You can change the colors to get different colored velvet. So now let's try to enable our bump map. So first, let's try it how it is. And notice how this fabric pattern is not working with velvet at all. It's too sharp, too large. So we're going to leave the folds map where it is and change the fabric bump to a cellular map to give a speckled appearance to this material. So I'm going to change the cell colors like this and reduce the cell size a lot. Something very, very tiny. So the fabric now appears to be fuzzy from the small cellular bumps that it has. So if you look at some reference images of velvet, it is pretty fuzzy. In fact, it is what causes velvet to look like velvet. So okay, that's a basic velvet material. You can change the colors to pretty much anything you like. For example, let's set up a green velvet. And here it is. Okay. Another tricky material is silk. So I got some reference images here. For example, let's look at this one here. It has a nice tranquil quality to it. It looks pretty shiny. I've tried in the past to replicate this look by using the reflect section of V-Ray material, but the effects were always not quite there, not satisfactory. So I've developed a new, well, perhaps not new, but a different method to create this silk effect. So let's first look at this image here. I'm going to replicate the silk effect using a fall off map. And I will not be using a reflect map at all. So how this works? Look how the silk changes appearance depending on at what angle it's facing you. So notice that there is a pretty sharp highlight that's visible on all the folds. And there is a darker color and everything between. So the way you do this is by using the fall off curve. So let's create a new V-Ray material and assign a fall off map to the diffuse slot. Let's change it to towards away, perhaps flip around. And now let's try to replicate the curve of silk highlights. So first I'm setting everything to dark, and now I will add some points. So what I found is that the most effective way to create this highlight is not by making it appear in this higher point here, I'm in the center, but instead make it slightly offset to the right. So add a couple of more points here. Make them smooth. Okay, notice the sharp highlight here I've just created. to get these points. Okay, perhaps something like this. Let's try it out. So perhaps the effect is a bit too strong. This already looks like a gray silk material. Actually pretty close to this one here, except for the color. And it renders very fast. You don't need to mess with the reflection settings at all. Well, this method is fake, but it works pretty well. Okay, to change the colors, simply go up and change these colors. For example, if you want a blue base color with purple highlights, you can do that here, like this. Very nice. You have very great control over the colors. And you're not limited to just simple, let's say, green darker color and green lighter color. You can mix and match whatever you want. There are many different fabrics that have some weird colors going on, like for example this one here. It has blue highlights and some purples and some blues. So let's set up blue highlights. Swap that around. Okay. So then there is the purple. And to make the last part dark blue, like here, you can assign another fall of map in this slot. Copy the purple first, paste, and change the second color to dark blue. Like this. Nothing much to it. Okay, look at it. You have a 3-color fall off now going on. Perhaps I've exaggerated the color differences a bit too much, but you get the basic idea. You can play around with colors, with curves. You can get very many different effects of shiny fabrics like silk. Okay, for most materials it's enough to use one simple fall of map with 2 colors. Usually one darker and one lighter. Okay, so that's a basic silk material. So let's look at some advanced silks. For example, this one here. It's composed of two different silks. The highlights are playing nicely with the light. For example, here's a damask pattern. Let's open it up. So here this part is lighter, and here it is darker than the background. That's an interesting color change. So you can simulate that like this. Let's copy this material first. Drag and drop. name to silk damask. So the basic idea is this. We're going to copy our diffuse map and change it from fall off to mix. Keep the old map as submap and paste in the second slot. So now we have our two fall off maps in two different mix slots. So what I'm going to do is go to the second slot and offset the highlights to the right. Just select these points and move them to the right. Okay, you can't see it now because it's not using any mix amount. So I'm going to use a simple damask texture like this. Let's see it first in the viewport. Okay, something like this. So back to our fall off map. So it looks like I've shifted it a bit too far. Let's move it a bit closer. And maybe bring this down. Like this. The idea is to create two different fall off patterns to show off the damask texture. So notice how the shininess of material is changing depending on the angle you're seeing it, just like real damask silk. There are no rules on how the fall off curve should be constructed. So I usually just go by eye, look for what looks best for me. Basically just play around with the curves and the colors and try to find something you like. So that's it, that's how you create a damask silk material. So you can make the difference very subtle, or you can make it very strong. Here's a very subtle offset of fall off curve. Just enough to show off the pattern. Notice how it's barely visible. So as your pattern you can use any black and white texture you have. You can draw a new one, you can create one from photographs, or you can use some from texture collections. It's your choice. So that's it. Let's leave it like this. So another fabric I want to show you is crushed velvet. Okay, I'm going to find an example. Here it is. Just like the regular velvet, but with some sharp patterns on it that are much brighter. So let's copy this here. Rename to Velvet Crushed and assign to our material. Okay, so what I'm going to do is blend this material with another V-Ray material. Sorry. So change it to V-Ray blend material, keep it as submaterial, and copy it to the second slot. Okay, so for blend amount, I have a nice patchy texture prepared. I guess it's this one. Let's increase the tiling a bit. Okay, so now we have the same material in both base and coat slots, and let's change the coat material properties. Go to the diffuse, and let's change the curve to be much brighter. Something like this. So now we have the regular velvet and the shiny version mixed together with the patchy bitmap, which creates a nice crushed velvet look. It's very common on luxury furniture, sofas, and so on. There is actually no need to use V-Ray blend material. You could achieve the same effect by using the mix map in the diffuse slot. So I just wanted to show you that you can use many approaches to get the same result.